I'm Teresa Carraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. Today, I'm going to be connectualizing between a number of Russell Brand's interviews from his Under the Skin podcast. Now, connectualize, I differentiate from contextualize. The contextualize is to put something in its own little pod, its own little things that are tangential to it. What I'm doing is taking an idea over here and connecting it with one way over here. I'm forming that neural network that Russell sometimes talks about. So in this case, my last episode, called The Crisis of Meaninglessness, was responding to Bret Weinstein and Heather Heying. In that, they talk about a couple of different points with religions and governments and economies that I challenged. So then, because I do the recent episode and then I've been doing Russell's interviews from the beginning, I ended up listening to Yuval Noah and then Yannis Varoufakis and found that they both actually made the points that I was trying to make in a much better fashion, of course. So I wanted to put that together, and that also touches on an episode that I did on Sam Harris and other ones on Alister McGrath and Iain McGilchrist. So I'm going to try to put all this together. In the Bret's interview, one thing that he and Heather talk about is that religions are stories that allowed people to be successful, that they empowered people, and that was why they lasted. I challenge that as something that made the powerful more powerful, that it did not give power to the people who were being oppressed, which was most of the people within that religion. And so Yannis Varoufakis had a really amazing statement where he said that an authoritarian system cannot survive on violence alone. It would take far too many people. You'd have to have a police force that was a high percentage of the population. So what he says is you need an ideology that legitimizes that oppression in the minds of the oppressed. Now that also confirms something that I said in my episode, The War on Burqas, on Sam Harris. Sam talks about why he feels that moralities of different religions, that some of them are better than others. That, for instance, although Christians and Muslim Palestinians are both equally oppressed, you don't have Christian Palestinians who are blowing themselves up. And so my point was, so that's superior, but only superior for the Israelis, because any kind of religion that makes it where you don't fight back is something that I think is very convenient for whatever empire is occupying that territory. And so then Yuval Noah, he is so fun. He talks about how all of the ideas of nations and corporations are all these legal fictions that are brought about by lawyers who are shamans, who cast legal spells, that you have this way of transforming things and turning them into something that they're not by casting these spells. And I think that's a really interesting idea. So I was looking at that in terms of both religions and nations and economies and how they relate to the concept of moral superiority versus the idea that we are all born morally equal. And if we're born morally equal, then our behavior is a result of differing circumstances. So it still leaves us as morally equal. So My show is called The Third Paradigm because I think that we're looking at things as continuums, but there's always something that is a different angle at which we could be viewing it. So in this case, what I'm looking at is the difference between atheist and religious, and then morally equal versus morally superior. And so I take the different ideologies and I divide and different people and I divide them. And again, I'm not saying that these people are that I'm just saying that this is the belief system that they're talking about. And so if you look at this, is going to get too distracting. I'll bring this down. So if you look at the concept that some people are morally superior to others, and you look at it from the atheist viewpoint, then I think that all of our system of money, of communism, of capitalism, and of democracy, which Yannis Varoufakis says is a fig leaf for oligarchy. So those are all based on the idea that some people are morally superior to others, but they're not religious. And Sam Harris also shares that ideology. On the side of religions that look at us as being morally superior to others, you have Buddhism, you have Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam. All of those have this internal hierarchy in which some people are more favored by God. And so I find that Ben Shapiro also falls into that mindset. I also find that Sadhguru it has that same idea that it's not systems that we need to change, that what we need to change are people, that people are greedy or selfish or are different than, for instance, he sees himself, or that Ben sees himself. And so I think that there are different ways of looking at religion or atheism as being really the same if both of those are looking at a system that differentiates people based on their moral superiority. On the other side of that, with atheism, I find that Yannis, that Yuval, that Bret and Heather, and that Edward Snowden all self-identify as atheist, but they all are looking at a sense of all people being morally equal, and therefore looking at systems that enable people to govern themselves. I think that sovereignty and anarchy and libertarianism are all systems that are based on that same concept, that all communities are capable, equally capable, of self-governance. And then on the religious side, I find that within the podcast that Alister McGrath and Iain McGilchrist both had that sense of people being morally equal, and they come at that from a religious point. I differed in terms of how I think the religions themselves differentiate people, but I think that they are looking at people as being equal. Some of the ultimates in this, in terms of religion, are Thich Nhat Hanh and the Dalai Lama, both of whom look at all people as being one. The extreme of saying that we are all morally equal, because if we are one, how could that be any other way? And so in every religion, there is always a mystical strain or spiritual strain. And I find that those mystical strains of every one of the institutional religions that I talked about, every one of their mystical strains comes to that same conclusion, that we are one. And so they all work from that position of equality. So I don't think it matters to me whether someone is religious or atheist. What matters to me is, how do they see other people? Do they see other people as being inferior to themselves morally or inferior to others, or do they see all people as having an equal right to develop themselves within a system that encourages that? Now let's look at the stories of nations and economies. In Bret and Heather's interview, they said that capitalism hadn't been around long enough as a story to be a myth, to be something equal to the ideology of a religion. In my episode, I disputed that because money has been around for 3,500 years, as I talk about in my book, How to Dismantle an Empire. And then I listened to Yuval, who says money is the most successful story ever told. And so if we look at money as being a myth, what is it a myth of? I think that it's a myth of ownership, that I have a subsection in my book called Truthish Lies and Legal Fictions. I stole the term truthish lies from Stephen Colbert. And that talks about how the overwhelming amount of money in the U.S. is created through mortgage debt. And mortgage debt is created by banks by double entry bookkeeping, where they create the money over here and they create the debt over here. And then their books match. Through that legal fiction, they own our labor. In George Carlin's words, they own us. They own 60 years of our labor because they are the default owners of everything, of every property as it's passed from one person to another. That's a legal fiction that we have to challenge if we're going to take back our lives and our labor. Yannis mentions that in his dealings with the powers over Greece's political situation, that one of the things that was told to him is that politics cannot be allowed to change the economics of Greece. And so politics is really just a game that's being played that has nothing to do with the reality of who has ownership. Who does the myth of ownership favor? Yuval talks about corporations, that corporations are, again, a legal fiction that's been created by these shamanistic lawyers. And what are they a myth of? In Yuval's words, something is alive if it can suffer. Clearly, corporations, nations, none of these can suffer, and so they're not alive. What are they, though? They are a filter that says we can create damage, we can cause violence, either physical violence or economic violence of possession, and at the same time, we're invulnerable. We, the real people behind the corporations, behind the nations, have complete impunity. We cannot be hurt, but we can profit from that violence. And so we have nations as a fiction of legal violence, that there are some forms of violence that are permissible and that we are all just going to go along with. The title of this episode I took from Yannis Varoufakis when he says that alienation is the worst form of slavery because it takes away your ability to choose right from wrong. In our nations, we don't have the right to do no wrong. Whatever our nation decides is right in terms of imposing violence, whether that's economic or physical violence, we have to go along with, because that's we are in the thrall of those sorcerers that have created that. Now, something that Russell says is that ideas change the world, And if you want power, you have to control the ideas. I think that works both ways, which is why I think we really need to challenge each other in terms of the consistency of our ideas. Either ideas are all equal and people aren't, or people are equal and ideas aren't. Because otherwise, if you have the idea that some of us are morally superior to others, that idea would have to be equal to the idea that we're all morally equal. And so that's inconsistent. That cannot both be true. So if we challenge the ideas to be consistent, then we can look at the people and say, of course, I respect you as being as morally astute and as intelligent as I am, and that's why I'm challenging your idea. If I didn't challenge your idea, it would be because I was thinking that I was morally superior in my idea that we're morally equal, and therefore I want to hang on to that idea, and so I don't want you to come to the same place as me. So in order to respect each other as people, we need to challenge these ideas. In conclusion of his interview, Yuval says that powerful word sorcerers change reality, and we need to make sure that the stories serve us rather than us serving the stories. I think that Russell is a powerful word sorcerer, and I think that he is telling stories that serve us. And we need to keep developing those stories. We need to keep making sure that there is consistency between all of the stories that we're telling, so that we can't be fooled by the other people, like nations, like corporations, like capitalism, that are trying to fool us into thinking that we don't have the capacity to really understand what they're dealing with. So if you want to go deeper into this conversation and look at the nuances that we need to understand, check out this video on Sam Harris, the war on burqas, and the recent one on the crisis of meaninglessness with Bret and Heather. And ideally, go to my subscription channel and look at all of the different episodes that I've done on spirituality and metaphysics and how that relates to things like politics, culture, and especially economics. Thank you.